The Atlantic wind sliced through the morning mist as a silver car stopped at the main entrance of Naval Support Base Harborview. Floodlights buzzed, illuminating the pale gray eyes of the woman who stepped out, steadying a heavy bag strap with one hand. She wore jeans, a worn navy sweatshirt, and boots marked by countless miles. Nothing official, nothing noteworthy. The sentry in the booth barely stirred. He took her identification, scanned the name, and waved her through without hesitation. Behind him, 2 Marines leaned against the concrete barricade, drinking coffee and exchanging banter. "Another logistics transfer," one remarked with a smirk. "Hope she processes paperwork faster than the previous one." Their laughter trailed behind as she entered the base, wind sweeping strands of hair across her face. She offered no response, didn't glance backward. She simply continued forward, observing every detail, like someone cataloging a world she already comprehended far too thoroughly. Nobody present understood the reality. The newcomer wasn't administrative staff. She was Rear Admiral Emma Hartfield, Harborview's new commanding officer. Emma Hartfield had worn a uniform for over half her existence, but that morning she arrived at Harborview resembling any exhausted traveler. Jeans, faded sweatshirt, gripping a single bag containing less than a quarter of her decorations accumulated through the years. The remainder stayed secured in a small container at her quarters, back in Portsmouth. Medals, commendations, plaques engraved with her name. Evidence of nights she preferred not recalling. Rear Admiral Emma Hartfield, youngest admiral in fleet history, the officer who guided a strike group through a narrow Arabian Gulf passage under attack and returned every vessel safely, the strategist whose Pacific plans transformed potential catastrophes into quiet, classified successes. Senior officers throughout numerous rooms recognized her name. Sailors aboard distant vessels shared stories about her as though she were a tempest that arrived and left calmer waters behind. None of that appeared on the plain identification badge attached to her sweatshirt now. Administrative transfer, it stated. She had selected those words personally. The car that delivered her vanished down the main road. Emma walked alone along the sidewalk bordering the chain-link fence, ocean wind carrying the distant clang of metal from the shipyard. She passed a cluster of junior sailors gathered around a smoking area. One looked up, saw no uniform, and looked straight through her. Perfect, she thought. That's precisely what I require. The headquarters building loomed ahead, square and grey, with glass doors lacking shine. Inside, the lobby hummed with telephones, printers, and the dull ache of fluorescent lighting. A television in the corner displayed an old training video nobody watched. She approached the reception desk and presented her orders. The petty officer behind the eye computer appeared no older than 20. His name tag read Johnson. He had dark circles beneath his eyes, a half-consumed energy drink near his elbow, and a stack of forms appearing untouched for weeks. "Ma'am," he asked, fingers still typing at his keyboard. "Transfer from Portsmouth," Emma said quietly. "Administrative support. Reporting as directed." "Right," he muttered repeatedly. "One moment." He skimmed the orders, eyes moving across her name without pausing. The Admiral designation, classification codes, and routing path through higher headquarters had been simplified before her departure. Several trusted contacts in Washington had assisted with that. What remained resembled a routine reassignment for a mid-level officer nobody recognized. Johnson clicked through several screens, then picked up the telephone. "Yeah, Davis's office? Your new transfer just arrived," he said. "Yeah, admin track. Badge is ready. Should I send her up now?" "All right." He disconnected, handed her a base access card, and gestured toward the hallway. "Third floor. Office of Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Davis. End of the corridor, door on the right. He'll get you settled." "Thank you," Emma said. He gave a distracted nod and was already answering another incoming call as she turned away. The elevator creaked upward. Emma watched her reflection in the dull metal doors. No insignia, no rank on her shoulders. Just the calm face of a woman in her late 30s who had spent too many nights in command centers illuminated by red emergency lights, listening to radios fall silent and waiting to discover which voice wouldn't return. More than once, she'd thought those experiences were her only real burden. The stars that followed simply made forgetting harder. The elevator doors opened on the third floor. A long hallway extended ahead, lined with doors and bulletin boards covered in outdated announcements. One poster advertised a family charity run postponed 3 times. Another promoted a wellness program nobody had removed after the dates expired. She knocked softly on the final door. "Enter," a voice called, flat and occupied. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Davis sat behind a desk, seemingly drowning in paperwork. Stacks of files leaned toward his elbows. A half-empty coffee mug cooled near his right hand. The skin beneath his eyes was as weary as Johnson's downstairs, but his posture was straight, his uniform crisp, his ribbons aligned without the slightest irregularity. He didn't look up immediately. He finished signing the document before him, stamped it, then finally glanced at her. "You're the transfer?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Emma replied. "Administrative support. Reporting as directed." He scanned the abbreviated version of her orders briefly and reached for another folder. "Hartfield," he said aloud, more to the paper than to her. "All right, Hartfield. Welcome to Harborview. You'll work in the logistics office. They need personnel more than I do. Major Stevens will be your direct supervisor." "Yes, sir." "Familiar with the new requisition system?" he asked, still not quite meeting her gaze. "I have some familiarity with it," she said. If he detected anything in her tone, he showed no indication. "Good." "It's a disaster," he muttered. "We're months behind on critical items. The motor pool is furious, communications is half disabled, and higher command is pressuring me about readiness metrics. You can start by not quitting within the first month. Stevens is competent, but she's running on empty. She doesn't need another person who collapses when the paperwork accumulates." Emma allowed a faint, nearly invisible smile to touch her lips. "I don't quit easily, sir." This time he looked directly at her. For half a second, something like interest flickered in his eyes. It vanished. "Logistics is down the hall. Room 23, he said. "Report to Major Catherine Stevens. She'll show you the rest." She gave a crisp nod. It wasn't the sharp, practiced Admiral nod she'd used in war rooms. It was smaller, more anonymous, just enough to match the role she'd selected. The logistics office door stood open, voices spilling into the hallway. Emma paused just outside, listening. "I'm telling you, if those rotor assemblies don't arrive this week, Martinez is going to ignite this place," someone said. "He can wait his turn," another voice replied. "Communications has been calling constantly. Anderson down in supply keeps claiming the shipments are incoming. I'll believe it when the crates actually appear." A brief burst of laughter, the exhausted kind. Emma stepped inside. Rows of desks filled the room, each occupied by a uniformed specialist or civilian clerk, wearing the same expression of controlled overwhelm. Computer monitors glowed with spreadsheets and tracking systems. Telephone lines blinked with calls on hold. Boxes of unfiled forms lined the walls like sandbags containing a flood. At the center stood Major Catherine Stevens, late 30s. Hair secured in a bun that had seen better mornings, uniform pressed, but the lines beneath her eyes carved by too many late nights staring at numbers that refused to balance. She held a tablet in one hand and a folder in the other, eyes moving from one workstation to the next with the intensity of someone juggling more tasks than physics allowed. "Ma'am," Emma said softly, "administrative transfer. Reporting to you." Stevens turned, examined the orders Davis had sent, and exhaled. "All right, Hartfield," she said. "We're grateful to have you. We lost 2 people to burnout last month and 1 to a promotion, so consider yourself thrown into deep water." From a desk near the window, a sergeant leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Hope she can type faster than the previous one, ma'am," he said. "Or at least not cry in the restroom on day 3. A couple of nearby clerks chuckled. One shook her head, not unkindly, but with the tired resignation of someone who'd witnessed that story too many times. Stevens shot the sergeant a look that could have stripped paint off a hull. "Sergeant Williams, you want to run the incoming priority queue today?" she asked. "No, ma'am," he replied quickly, returning to his screen. Emma didn't flinch. Her expression remained neutral, calm. She'd heard far sharper words thrown across steel decks in the middle of the night. The difference was that out there, the people throwing them usually understood what was at stake. Here, people were bleeding frustration into jokes because nobody had shown them another way. "You can start over here," Stevens said, motioning Emma toward an empty desk. "Log in with this guest account until IT processes your credentials. We'll put you on inbound requisitions and tracking misrouted shipments. If you see something that makes no sense, flag it. Don't assume it's your error. Chances are, the mistake started 3 months ago." "Yes, ma'am," Emma said. She set her bag down beside the chair, slid into the seat, and let her fingers rest lightly on the keyboard. The screen blinked awake, filling with lines of numbers and codes. Behind each one was a unit waiting on something they needed to perform their job. She began to work. She didn't complain, didn't try to impress anyone with stories, rank, or clever remarks. She listened. She watched the way Stevens moved through the room, the way Williams muttered under his breath when a form bounced back, the way a civilian clerk rubbed her temples every time she opened an email from supply. Outside the windows, she could see the tops of cranes over the harbor, the silhouettes of ships at berth. Idle vehicles sat in a lot near the pier, some missing tires, some with hoods open to the sky. Delayed repairs, deferred maintenance, all symptoms of the same sickness. The base had slipped into something worse than chaos. It had slipped into complacency, requisitions delayed, then delayed again until late became the new normal. Vehicles sidelined until nobody remembered them moving, communications patched together just enough to pass inspections, morale so low that people stopped expecting anything better, and leadership so numb that they stopped noticing the expectations were gone. Emma saw it in the way people sighed before dialing a number, in the way they joked about the system like it was a weather pattern they couldn't change, in the way nobody looked at the posters on the wall that talked about excellence and readiness. She had seen combat, loss, and the weight of real command. She had watched young faces disappear from the watch bill after one bad night at sea. She had directed ships into danger and prayed her calculations were correct. She carried those ghosts quietly, the way she carried everything else. Here, nobody saw any of that. To them, she was a newcomer at a cluttered desk, another pair of hands thrown at a problem too large for anyone to name aloud. Emma preferred it that way, for now. Quiet dignity suited her better than ceremony. Hidden. Authority gave her something brass on her collar never could. From this vantage point, she could see the cracks exactly as they were, and if she could see them clearly enough, she could decide where to start breaking the old habits before they broke the people who still cared. By the end of Emma's first week, Harborview had revealed its teeth in a way no war zone ever had. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the slow grind of a place that had forgotten how to expect better. It started in a cramped conference room with bad coffee and worse air. She was there to sit quietly in the back, a stack of logistics reports in a folder on her lap. Stevens had sent her to observe the coordination meeting and take notes. The officers around the table shuffled their own folders without much enthusiasm. Captain Brian Thompson, operations officer, flipped through the agenda and frowned. "Again with the new administrative procedures," he muttered. "Every time we get a new batch of transfer clerks, the whole schedule turns to chaos." The others chuckled. "They arrive, rewrite the workflow, then abandon us for some comfortable job at headquarters," another captain said. "Meanwhile, we're out here trying to guess which form to use this week." Emma sat against the wall, pen poised above her notepad, expression neutral. New transfer clerks. She had written the draft version of the readiness protocols they were complaining about in a windowless room 3,000 miles away. She had argued for simpler language, clearer priorities, fewer signatures. What had emerged the other end, once committees and edits and compromises finished with it, was heavier than she liked, but still better than what they had before, on paper. In this room, the words lived a different life. "Look at this," Thompson said, tapping a line. "New deployment, readiness codes." Another brilliant idea from someone who's never had to move a unit in the real world. He laughed, and a few others joined in automatically. It was easier to mock a faceless author than to ask why nobody at their level had been in the room when the system was redesigned. Emma's gaze drifted from face to face, a tired, cynical, not malicious, not lazy, just convinced that nothing they said would change anything above their pay grade. She wrote down what they complained about, not to defend herself later, to see where the reality on the ground didn't match the assumptions she and others had made at the top. After the meeting, nobody asked her opinion, nobody asked her name. She slipped out with the rest of the support staff, one more silent figure carrying a folder nobody wanted to read. The dining facility at midday was louder, but the script barely changed. Long tables, stainless steel serving lines, the smell of coffee that had been on the warmer too long. Emma moved through the food line with a tray in hand, listening more than she spoke. At the table behind her, two lieutenants in flight suits sat with their backs to the window, voices low but sharp. "Have you seen the new readiness drill schedule?" one said. "Whoever created that has never tried to coordinate aircrew sleep cycles." "Yeah," the other snorted. "I'd love to meet the genius who thinks we can do all that, and still hit flight hours, maintenance windows, and inspections. Must be nice to live in theory land." Emma paused, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. The printed schedule in their hands was a heavily modified version of the timeline she had once diagrammed on a whiteboard, trying to build something that would push readiness without breaking people. She poured herself half a cup and moved on. They never looked up from their complaints long enough to see the woman passing 3 feet away who had once stood in a watch center at 3 in the morning, rewriting those same schedules on the fly while destroyers moved through narrow waters. She sat alone at a table near the far wall, not isolated, just out of the current of conversation. Fork in one hand, pen in the other, quietly building a map of a base that had more frustration than direction. It struck her again at the motor pool. Stevens had handed her a stack of requisition slips to get approved in person. Some were routine, some were high priority. One, flagged 3 times in red, was for parts that would put 3 critical vehicles back on the road. "Take these down to the motor pool and see if you can get someone to approve them," Stevens had said. "If anyone gives you trouble, smile and wait them out." The motor pool smelled like oil, hot rubber, and old exhaust. Rows of vehicles lined the bay, some elevated on lifts, others disassembled with their components laid out like organs on metal trays. Staff Sergeant Jason Torres stood in the middle of it all, clipboard in one hand, grease streaked down his forearm. He barked instructions to his team with clipped efficiency. Emma waited until he finished reprimanding a private for using the wrong torque setting before she stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant Torres?" she asked. He glanced down at her badge, then at the forms in her hand. "Let me guess," he said. "More promises from logistics that the parts are definitely, absolutely coming this time." "Requisitions to confirm," Emma replied calmly. "If we get these approved today, we can move them up the chain faster." He took the forms, scanned the numbers, and snorted. "I'm not approving this," he said. "You clerks have no idea what it means when these vehicles sit. You want me to certify that we're satisfied with parts we don't have, so somebody up there can check a box and call it done." He pushed the clipboard back at her. "You look new," he added. "Here's a tip. Don't touch fleet vehicles with your paperwork, unless you understand what happens when they don't move. Rookies shouldn't be the ones closing out these requests." There were a few smirks from nearby mechanics, the kind that say they'd wanted to say the same thing for weeks. Emma didn't let her. Expression change. "I understand the concern, Staff Sergeant," she said. "I'm not asking you to certify anything untrue. I'm asking what you need on paper so we can stop pretending the parts are somewhere they're not." For a moment, his eyes narrowed, as if he was trying to decide whether she was another obstacle or something else. "We need accurate status on back orders, not optimistic estimates," he said finally. "We need someone to stop letting supply mark things as in transit for 4 weeks. And we need leadership to understand that a vehicle sitting dead on the lot isn't just a number, it's a mission that won't launch." She nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "then let's start there." He grumbled but took the forms again, this time making careful notes in the margins, refusing to let anything slide for the sake of convenience. On her way back through the office later, a clerk tossed a file onto Emma's desk with a little too much flair. "Here you go, ma'am," the woman said, the word edged with sarcasm. "If you figured out how to make the new system work, feel free to share with the rest of us mortals." There was laughter from the next desk over. Emma just smiled. "I'll let you know when I'm qualified for sainthood," she answered lightly. "For now, I'll settle for getting these 3 units their replacement radios before the end of the month." She didn't bite, didn't fire back with the kind of authority that would have frozen the room. She had done that before, in other places, with a chest full of visible rank to back it up. Here, she needed something else. She spent her evenings in front of a computer while the office emptied, quietly untangling a backlog of data entries that a junior sailor had been drowning in. The young man, Seaman First Class Parker, had stopped by her desk with a haunted look after one particularly bad day. "Ma'am, I think I messed up," he said. "Some of the old entries are incorrect, and now the new system is flagging everything. I'm trying to catch up, but every time I fix something, 3 more errors appear. I've been staying late for 2 weeks. I don't think Major Stevens knows how far behind I am." Emma slid her chair closer to his screen. "Show me," she said. For the next few hours, she worked beside him, tracing the error patterns, spotting where the training manual didn't match the actual system behavior. Creating a simple checklist he could follow without getting lost. By the time the clock crept toward midnight, the worst of the pile was under control. Parker rubbed his eyes, exhausted. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "Most people tell me to figure it out, or they just tell the major I'm slow." Emma shook her head. "Everyone is fast when the system makes sense," she said quietly. "You weren't the problem." His gratitude was soft, almost embarrassed. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, seriously. "Keep the checklist," she replied. "You're better at this than you think. The system just didn't give you a fair start." At the RA Communications Hub, she saw what happened when those hidden errors made it all the way to the edge. Sergeant First Class Robert Chen met her at the door. The air inside hummed with machines that looked too old for the workload they carried. Cables snaked along the walls like vines, some labeled, some not. "You from logistics?" Chen asked. "Yes," Emma said. "I'm trying to understand what we're breaking on your side." He barked a short laugh. "Where do you want to start?" he replied. "Half of our primary relay gear is past recommended replacement. The backup racks are cannibalized from older systems. We're running at maybe 60% of what we should be able to do, and every time I submit a requisition for critical parts, I get told they're on order or stuck somewhere I can't pronounce." He gestured toward a rack of equipment, lights flickering. "See that?" he said. "If one more component goes down, we won't have redundancy. One lightning strike, one surge, one bad day, and this base will be deaf at the worst moment." Emma walked the line of gear, taking in model numbers, maintenance tags, the way panels had been taped back into place. "What happens if you push this up the chain?" she asked. "I've been pushing," he answered, "for months. It vanishes in a queue somewhere. Somebody marks it as received or says we're not in the highest risk category, so we get bumped down. On paper, we're stable. In reality, we're a thunderstorm away from a disaster." She didn't make promises. She didn't flash authority she had not yet revealed. She just asked one more question. "What do you need most urgently?" she said. He listed part numbers. She wrote them down, not as a logistics clerk covering her own checklist, but as someone quietly assembling a picture of where one base might fail the moment the seas turned rough. Word began to spread slowly that the newcomer in logistics didn't roll her eyes at complaints, that she knew what questions to ask, that she stayed late and listened long after she could have gone home. The tone around her shifted by degrees. In the early days when she walked into a room, the first reaction had been laughter and gossip, ridicule for the faceless they ruining everyone's life with new forms and requirements. Later, when she passed through the motor pool or communications hub, conversations dipped for a moment instead of flaring. People watched her with a faint, puzzled curiosity. How did she know that particular procedure from a shipboard system in the Pacific? Why did she seem to understand both the high-level diagrams and the smallest wrench turning in the bay? Why did she treat a junior sailor's data error with more care than most officers gave to a full report? Nobody had answers yet. They only knew she didn't fit neatly into the box they had built in their heads for a transfer clerk. If you had been standing there, watching a newcomer get laughed out of the room, watching her stay calm while others used her as a convenient target for their frustration, what would you have done? Would you have joined the jokes? Or would you have noticed the way her eyes missed nothing, like someone quietly taking command of a ship nobody even realized they were on? The hum of the air conditioners was the only sound left in the logistics office long after sunset. Most desks were empty now, the glow of their monitors fading to blue sleep screens. Emma sat in the corner, finishing the last of a data check. Her sleeve caught on the desk edge as she reached for a pen, sliding up her forearm just far enough for the ink beneath to show. A trident, faded and simple, the outline of the old Pacific Fleet Command Group. No color, no flourish, just the quiet mark of someone who had earned it decades ago. The logistics tech beside her, Petty Officer Russell, caught the glimpse and froze mid-sentence. "Ma'am, where'd you get that?" he asked, eyes wide. Emma glanced down, then tugged her sleeve back over it. Her tone was light, calm. "Old mistake," she said. "Kept it to remember." He laughed softly, uncertain. "You must have been pretty deep Navy to have one of those." Emma just smiled, a small curve of her lips that didn't invite more questions. The next day, in the break room, two sailors debated which Japanese port city had the best ramen. One of them turned to Emma as she poured her coffee. "You ever been out that way, ma'am?" Without thinking, she answered in fluent Japanese, the rhythm precise, effortless. Both men blinked. The older of the two tilted his head. "You sound like one of the locals. You stationed in Yokosuka or something." She stirred her coffee and said quietly, "Once upon a time." Then she walked out, leaving them staring after her. That night, the base grew silent except for the low whine of wind coming off the sea. Emma pulled her jacket tighter and walked the perimeter near the flight line. The tarmac glistened under security lights, scattered with parked aircraft like sleeping giants. A young sergeant stepped from the guard post, flashlight cutting across her path. "Ma'am, hold up. You're not cleared for the line this late." She handed him her identification badge without hesitation. He frowned, scanning it. "Administrative transfer, huh? Regulations say no unauthorized personnel past 2300. Emma's voice stayed even. "Section 7, Paragraph 2, Security Operations Manual. Late-night inspection exemptions apply to command-designated observers." The sergeant blinked, lowering his flashlight. "You know that by heart. Regulations are only useful if you remember them," she said softly. He cleared his throat, straightening unconsciously. "Understood, ma'am. Carry on." When she turned away, the beam of his flashlight wavered slightly. He watched her walk the length of the flight line, each step calm and deliberate, the Atlantic wind pulling at her hair. Rumors began to circulate by morning. The new logistics transfer had a tattoo you only saw on officers who'd commanded ships. She spoke Japanese like she'd lived there. She quoted base security regulations faster than a chief with 30 years. And nobody could quite figure out how she knew so much, or why she always seemed to be listening like a commander inspecting her own deck. Who was she, really? The storm came in low and fast over Harbor View, the way trouble often does when people are already tired. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of gunmetal. Wind slapped the flag against its pole with a hard, uneven rhythm. From the logistics office window, Emma watched the first sheets of rain blur the outlines of the ships in port. The weather report had called it a strong coastal system. Nothing unusual, nothing they hadn't seen before. Inside, nothing slowed down. Phones still rang, printers still jammed, requisitions still crawled through the system like injured animals. Major Stevens stood over Emma's desk, rubbing her temples. "We have a supply aircraft inbound tonight," she said. "High-priority mission kits, communications replacements, some of the parts Torres has been begging for. If the weather holds, it'll land just before midnight." If the weather turns, she let the thought trail off. "We lose another week," Emma said quietly. "At best," Stevens answered. "Command already thinks we're a problem base. One more missed delivery, one more glitch, and we'll have inspectors crawling over us like ants." Emma nodded, absorbing that. She had seen what happened when a base became a punchline in headquarters conversations. Resources dried up, good people transferred out. The ones who stayed learned to stop asking for help. Outside, thunder rolled closer. By early evening, the storm was fully on them. Rain drove horizontally, rattling the office windows. The lights flickered once, then steadied. A few people glanced up uneasily and went back to work. Emma had stayed late again, combing through a tangle of requisitions connected to the incoming aircraft. She wanted every document clean, every item properly coded, so there would be no excuse for the load to vanish into some other base's inventory by mistake. Down the hall, someone cursed as the network hiccuped. A printer spat out half a page, then died. The first real sign of trouble came as a sound, a long descending beep from somewhere deeper in the building. At first, it blended with the storm and the usual background noise. Then, it repeated. Longer. Louder. Stevens stepped out of her office, phone pressed to her ear. "What do you mean the tower just lost primary communications?" she snapped. "Redundancies are supposed to handle a surge like that." "When?" "All right, we're coming down." She hung up and looked at the room. "Everybody save your work now," she said. "We have a potential communications issue." "Hartfield?" "With me." Emma was already on her feet. They moved quickly through the corridors, the lights flickering again as the building's backup systems adjusted. Outside, the storm pounded the base so hard that water sprayed under door frames. The air inside the communications hub was hotter than usual, thick with electronics and stress. Screens that usually glowed with stable green indicators were now crowded with yellow and red. Lines of data that should have flowed smoothly across the displays were frozen or jittering. Sergeant First Class Robert Chen stood near the main console, headset around his neck, barking into a landline. "I don't care what the software says," he snapped. "I'm telling you the relay is not holding. We have an aircraft inbound and the tower cannot maintain clear channels. If we lose this link in this weather, we're blind." He slammed the handset down, jaw tight. On another screen, Emma saw the problem spelled out in simple, brutal terms. The storm had triggered a power fluctuation that the aging equipment hadn't handled well. The primary communications array dropped to half function. The backup system, already cannibalized and patched together, was struggling to take the load. Data from the incoming aircraft's transponder blinked in and out, like a heartbeat stumbling in the dark. "Status?" Stevens asked. Chen scrubbed a hand over his face. "Primary antenna took a hit," he said. "Not a direct strike, but the surge damaged one of the key components. We're trying to push traffic through the backup chain, but it's choking. The tower is getting intermittent contact with the supply aircraft. They can hear us sometimes, sometimes not. If they cannot maintain positive communications, they'll divert or wave off. In this weather, that's not a quick fix." A young airman at the console turned in his chair, eyes wide. "Ma'am, the system is also mislogging ground vehicles," he said. "The storm interfered with the tracking updates. It's populating positions that don't make sense. If we have to get emergency vehicles to the runway, we'll be guessing who is where." The room buzzed with overlapping voices, suggestions, complaints, half-formed plans. Nobody was clearly in charge. The officer on duty looked overwhelmed, flipping through a manual that had never anticipated this exact combination of failures. Emma took it in. The failing screens, the frozen faces, the storm outside smashing against windows like a living thing. She had seen chaos before when missiles flew and ships turned hard to avoid being in the wrong place at the wrong second. This was quieter, but no less dangerous. Lives could still be lost here, not to enemy fire, but to confusion. The tower radio crackled through the speakers, voice distorted. "Harborview Tower, this is cargo flight. Repeat, read you broken, turbulence severe, fuel margins tightening." For a moment, nobody answered. The officer on duty hesitated, eyes flicking from one failing screen to another, as if he could will them back. Emma stepped forward. Her voice came out steady, calm, carrying just enough steel to cut through the noise. "Reroute tower traffic to frequency 325, she said. "Chen, check. The backup antenna chain physically, not just on the screen. I want eyes on every connection from the relay to the tower input. Torres needs a generator line feeding this room now. We cannot afford another voltage dip." Heads turned toward her. Some part of Chen's brain must have recognized the tone, even if his mind hadn't caught up, because he moved without arguing. "On it," he said, grabbing his toolkit and heading for the equipment racks. Someone else started to speak. "Ma'am, we cannot just change." Emma didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "The tower has multi-band capability," she said. "They can shift to 325 as an alternate approach frequency. The aircraft can too. The current channel is compromised by interference. We need a cleaner band that's still within their onboard preset range." The officer on duty blinked. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Because I watched an entire task group nearly lose a replenishment flight over the Gulf when we hesitated for 30 seconds arguing about protocol instead of acting," she answered. "Call the tower, now." Stevens watched, frozen in place, as if she were seeing someone she had never met before. Emma leaned over the console, fingers moving with the confidence of someone who had done this more times than she could count. She didn't shove the airman aside. She pointed. "Here," she said. "Reroute the tower feed. Confirm the alternate frequency in the system, then patch me into their audio." The tower operator's voice came through, edged with strained calm. "Cargo flight, this is Harborview Tower. Read you broken. Say again your fuel state. Static." Then a ragged reply. "Tower, this is cargo flight. Fuel below comfort margins. Divert options limited. Request priority guidance. Repeat, requesting." Emma motioned for the headset. The officer on duty handed it to her without quite knowing why. "This is Harborview," she said into the microphone, her tone flattening into the calm authority of command. "Cargo flight, switch to approach frequency 325. I say again, 325. Confirm when on channel." There was a pause. Then, "Copy. Harborview, switching." The storm howled against the building. Somewhere in the distance, thunder cracked directly overhead, making the lights flicker again. Chen's voice came over the internal line. "Backup antenna is dirty but stable," he said. "I bypassed the worst segment. You should see a cleaner signal on the new channel. The tower audio cleared noticeably. The aircraft's pilot sounded closer, steadier, as if someone had pulled him out of a tunnel. Harborview, this is cargo flight on 325. Reading you 5x5 now. Cargo flight, Harborview. Roger, Emma replied. We have you. Maintain current heading. Tower is vectoring you through the least severe part of the cell. Expect some turbulence, but you are within safe parameters. Priority landing is confirmed. Your ground support will be standing by. The tower operator jumped in, newly, confident now that the path had been laid down. Cargo flight, this is tower, he said. Continue approach, heading 095. Descend to... Emma stepped back, letting him regain his footing. She turned to the young airman responsible for vehicle tracking. Forget the automated positions for now, she said. Start a manual status check. Call the motor pool, security, medical. Get human confirmations for any vehicle that might need access to the runway. Don't trust anything on that screen until someone with eyes on it confirms. He nodded, grateful for clear instructions. Yes, ma'am. She made one more call. Get me Staff Sergeant Torres, she told the internal operator. If we need a generator line to this building, he's the one who will make it happen. Minutes later, Torres's voice came through, wind and rain loud behind him. They told me you needed power, he said. I'm outside with a team and a portable generator. Storm's nasty, but we can tie you in if the building feed goes unstable again. Set it up, Emma said. I'll clear you any access you need. I don't want these boards going dark while that aircraft is on approach. You got it, he replied. No pushback, no questions about her authority. Something in her tone made it unnecessary. Back in the communications room, screens steadied. The backup antenna chain carried the new load without collapsing. The tower's directions grew more precise as the signal held. The incoming aircraft's position resolved into a clear icon, moving along a defined vector. In less than 15 minutes, what had looked like a slow-motion disaster was under control. Stevens watched Emma as closely as she watched the status indicators. When the tower finally reported, cargo flight has landed, runway clear, a breath went out of the room all at once. Shoulders slumped. Someone laughed shakily. A few people clapped their hands without quite meaning to. Emma took off the headset and handed it back to the duty officer. Nice work, she said. Make sure the tower logs the frequency change and the weather impact accurately. That way, when some desk up the chain reads this later, they'll know what actually happened. Not just that the job got done. He nodded, still staring at her like he was trying to place a face he should have recognized. Major Stevens stepped closer. How did you... she began, then shook her head as if resetting. Hartfield, where did you learn to do all that? Emma shrugged very slightly. We had worse in the Gulf, ma'am, she said. Different frequency, same storm. I just hate seeing good people lose because of bad wiring and old habits. Stevens didn't have an answer for that. Outside, the rain still hammered the base, but inside the communications hub, the crisis had passed. The incoming aircraft taxied safely to its spot, bringing with it the parts and equipment so many had been waiting for. On paper, the incident would read like an equipment failure, resolved by quick thinking and proper procedure. In the hallways, in the dining facility, in the motor pool, a different story was already taking shape. They talked about how the new logistics transfer had walked into the communications room and sounded more like a battle group commander than a clerk. How she had called out the right frequency without checking a reference. How she had ordered seasoned NCOs into motion with the ease of someone who had been sending people into dangerous situations her entire adult life. No clerk could have done that, they said. No anonymous administrative transfer should have known that much, that fast. By the time Emma returned to her desk, whispers had raced ahead of her. Who was she? Where had she served? Why did her calm in the storm feel familiar to those who had once stood watch under a different flag, far from home? If you had been there, in that room, with the storm pounding outside and the screens going dark, would you have trusted the voice of a stranger who suddenly spoke like she owned the sky? Would you have trusted a stranger's voice, or frozen like everyone else? The next morning broke clean and bright as if the storm had never existed. The rain had scrubbed the sky until it shone an impossible blue over Harborview. On the parade field, the entire base stood in formation. Rows of uniforms shimmered under the rising sun. Boots hit the asphalt in perfect rhythm. Flags snapped in the sea wind. The brass band's notes carried across the water, strong and ceremonial. Word had spread like wildfire overnight. The mysterious new transfer who had somehow taken charge during the communications failure had vanished from her desk just before dawn. In her place, a rumor, A new commander was arriving from Washington, some Admiral barely 40, supposed to be a tactical prodigy. Officers whispered as they adjusted their dress caps. Probably one of those theory smart types, one said under his breath. Another reformer. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone. Attention on deck. Prepare for the arrival of the incoming commanding officer. The band struck up a march. All eyes turned toward the main entrance, and then, from the side of the field, a figure stepped into the sunlight. She wore full-dress whites, polished shoes catching the morning glare. Every ribbon and medal sat precisely where it belonged. The light found the Admiral's stars on her shoulders, bright, undeniable. For a breath, nobody moved. Major Catherine Stevens, standing near the front, went pale. Her voice slipped out before she could stop it. Oh my God. Behind the motor pool fence, Staff Sergeant Jason Torres froze, mid-motion, wrench in hand, as if someone had cut the sound out of the world. Near the gate, the young guard who had once waved her through without a glance straightened so fast his cap nearly flew off. His hand rose to his forehead in a sharp, trembling salute. Everywhere, recognition hit like a slow-moving wave. The quiet woman in jeans and a sweatshirt, the one who'd filed forms, walked the docks, fixed systems, and calmly commanded in the storm, was walking toward the podium. The announcer's voice wavered just once before regaining its professional tone. Ladies and gentlemen, Rear Admiral Emma Hartfield, assuming command of Naval Support Base Harborview. Silence fell across the parade field. Thousands of eyes followed her as she stepped up beside the outgoing commander. She paused, scanning the formation, the same faces that had once laughed, doubted, or ignored her. Her expression didn't harden, it didn't gloat. It was calm, measured, and utterly composed. She raised her hand in salute. The sound of hundreds of boots striking the ground echoed back like thunder rolling over calm seas. Every face turned pale, not from fear, but from realization. They had all seen her. They had spoken to her. They had underestimated her. And now, the woman they had brushed aside stood before them as the Admiral who would command them all. The wind off the water carried the faint smell of salt and jet fuel across the parade field as Emma Hartfield stepped up to the podium. The microphone caught a faint crackle of feedback, then went silent again, waiting for her voice. She stood tall, hands clasped behind her back, eyes sweeping over the sea of uniforms in front of her. Faces she knew now, not from rank charts or rosters, but from hallways, workrooms, and midnight crises. She saw the guard from the gate, the clerk who had joked about typing speed, the officers from the dining facility who had mocked the readiness protocols. All of them were there, backs straight, eyes forward. When she spoke, her tone was calm and unhurried, every word carrying across the still air. I spent my first week here as a transfer clerk, she said. No rank, no uniform, just a name on paper. I wanted to see this place the way you see it every day, when nobody important is watching. Her voice carried through the speakers, even and deliberate. The sound of the flag ropes tapping the pole was the only interruption. I saw frustration, she continued. I saw systems that made good people look like they were failing. I saw equipment waiting for signatures that never came. But I also saw something else. She paused. Every head seemed to lean forward slightly, drawn in. I saw people who still cared. People who fixed what they could, even when the system didn't thank them. People who kept showing up. A quiet ripple moved through the formation, something between shame and admiration. A few glances darted sideways, as if checking whether anyone else felt it too. Emma looked down the front row and found Major Catherine Stevens standing there, rigid as steel. Their eyes met briefly, and Emma nodded once. Major Stevens, she said, her voice strong. Stevens hesitated for half a second, then marched up, boots striking the asphalt like a drumbeat. She stopped 3 paces from the podium, saluted sharply. Emma returned it with precision. This officer held this command together when the systems around her broke, she said. She never stopped fighting for her people, even when it cost her sleep, patience, and peace of mind. She'll be leading the Logistics Reform Task Force effective immediately. Applause rose, hesitant at first, then growing until it filled the air. Stevens' jaw tightened as she tried to keep her composure, but her eyes glistened faintly before she turned back into formation. Next, Emma called, Staff Sergeant Jason Torres. The motor pool NCO looked stunned. Someone nudged him forward. He walked quickly to the front, grease still faintly visible at the edges of his hands despite his best effort to scrub it clean. Emma's tone softened slightly. When the storm hit, this man didn't wait for orders to act. He saw what needed to be done and made it happen. He reminded this command that the smallest decisions in the field can make the biggest difference in safety and readiness. He'll oversee our base-wide maintenance optimization program. Torres saluted, and for a moment, his rough hands trembled. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice thick. Finally, she looked to the communications section. Sergeant First Class Robert Chen, front and center. Chen stepped forward quickly, his face composed, but his eyes betraying surprise. Sergeant Chen kept the lines alive when our systems failed, Emma said. He refused to accept that good enough was good enough. His leadership in that room saved more than just an aircraft. It saved our credibility as a command. He'll head our new technical integrity initiative. Chen's salute was sharp, but his smile was brighter than regulation would allow. Emma returned the salute, then turned back to the formation as a whole. "These three didn't wait for permission to do the right thing," she said. "They acted. They spoke up. They cared. And that's what I expect from everyone on this base from this day forward." She let the silence stretch for a moment, the wind tugging at her uniform. Then she said, with quiet force, "From this day on, we fix problems before they become excuses." The words hung in the air, heavy and certain. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Davis, the man who had barely looked up from her paperwork the day she arrived, stepped forward. His right hand came up in a salute that was sharp, deliberate, and full of something that hadn't been there before: respect. Emma returned it, meeting his gaze with a small nod. And then, like a wave breaking, the rest of the base followed, one by one. Then all at once hundreds of hands rose, thousands of boots snapped together. The sound rolled across the parade field like thunder. It echoed against the hangars, across the water, off the steel hulls in the harbor. The kind of sound you felt in your chest. The Navy hymn began softly, the brass section lifting the first solemn notes. The sound mingled with the rush of wind and the rhythmic thud of boots as the ranks stood at full attention. Emma looked out over them. The same faces that had once smirked, sighed, or ignored her. Now they stood silent, eyes forward, united. No words, no applause. Just a salute that spoke louder than anything else could. On the far edge of the field, the young guard who had waved her through the gate all those days ago stood with his arm raised, trembling slightly, tears bright in his eyes. Emma drew in a slow breath and returned every salute in her line of sight, one deliberate motion at a time. In that moment, the storm, the doubt, the mockery, all of it washed away into something pure: respect. And as the hymn reached its final note, the last echo of 1,000 boots faded across the bay like a promise kept. 6 months later, Harborview no longer looked like the same place. The warehouses that once sat half-lit and cluttered now ran like clockwork. Every shipment logged, every item traceable, every form double-checked, not out of fear, but out of pride. What used to be excuses had become efficiency. Major Stevens, now promoted to lieutenant colonel, walked the floors with her sleeves rolled up, mentoring younger officers the way Admiral Hartfield had once quietly mentored her. The logistics chain, once a web of confusion, now worked so smoothly that other commands called for her blueprints. In the motor pool, Staff Sergeant Jason Torres oversaw spotless rows of vehicles ready for deployment. His maintenance metrics led the entire region. The same sergeant who once warned that leadership didn't listen now stood at the center of every readiness briefing, treated as an expert. Sergeant First Class Robert Chen's communications hub gleamed with new equipment. Every relay replaced, every backup tested. Uptime held at 100% for 5 months straight. His technicians trusted their systems again, and their leadership even more. The crooked supply officer, Captain Anderson, didn't last long after the audits began. The new oversight protocols that Emma herself had drafted exposed months of theft and falsified records. He was arrested quietly, court-martialed, and removed from service. The shock rippled through the base, but something deeper replaced the fear. Relief. The rot was gone. Morale soared. People stayed later not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Teams started competing to meet higher standards. The dining facility laughter sounded different now. not bitter, but real. Even the same guards who once waved Emma through the gate without a glance now stood straighter, snapping crisp salutes the second she passed. Admiral Hartfield never mentioned her undercover week again. She didn't need to. Her presence alone carried the memory of it. She led without ceremony, inspecting quietly, listening more than she spoke. Meetings began with questions instead of orders. When she praised someone, it carried weight. The base became something rare, a place where discipline and trust lived side by side. It wasn't perfect, but it was proud again. And when people asked how she had done it, she gave the same quiet answer, every time. Sometimes the strongest authority doesn't shout orders. It listens first, she said. Real power isn't in medals or stripes. It's in knowing the truth before anyone hides it. Under her command, Harborview stopped being just another naval installation. It became a family of excellence, rebuilt not by punishment or pride, but by humility, honesty, and a leader who cared enough to walk among her own before expecting them to follow. Rear Admiral Emma Hartfield never sought applause. She sought honesty. What began as a quiet walk through failure became a march toward integrity, one decision at a time. In 6 short months, she turned a base full of doubt into a place that believed again, not in slogans, but in one another. The same people who once laughed behind her back now stood taller when she passed. They had learned something from her silence, her calm, and her strength, that real leadership doesn't demand respect. It earns it. Every man and woman who once underestimated her now carries that lesson forward in every salute, every briefing, every mission.